Welcome everyone to our Food for Thought speaker series. It's been going on since the summer, so we're glad to have all of you here. Today we have John Austin, who is an EMPA of Class of 2014 alum. I think this might be our first recent alum to give one of these Food for Thought lectures. We hope to have you on. But thank you, John, for joining us. His session is going to cover the impact of intellectual property theft on American innovation and prosperity. And now, and in terms of instructions, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand in the participants tab. You can put your questions in the chat. And as always, if you could please keep yourself on mute unless you're asking a question. And thank you everyone for joining. I'll hand it off to Bill. And thank you, John.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you to you and Val for keeping Food for Thought going. And we're already have scheduled events into January, so I'm hoping this is going to be a permanent part of the EMPA program and SEPA and Columbia and the world. So thank you all. Thank you both in particular. And thank you, John, for joining us. As Jeremy said, one of our more recent alums, first out of the box here. We hope he'll lead some of his colleagues to our session. John, I know John, since he's been a student with us, he's a unique combination of someone who has a long history of government service and has now become an entrepreneur and started his own company and been extremely successful at that. And he has a lot to say about issues that we're very concerned about these days, as we were talking before we started, about information and how information is used in lots of different ways. And one person's information can be another person's fake news and vice versa. So getting accurate information is really a big part of what his company is about. So I don't want to take too much of his time. And if I just went through the highlights of his career, it'd be 1 o'clock. So just let me hit the highlights. His company that he founded is iMask Intelligence. It's a full service private investigative and business intelligence company. They do complex investigations related to background checks, corporate confidential investigations, mergers and acquisition due diligence, intelligence analysis, and support for litigation. He's got clients in all 3 sectors throughout the country. He had a long, over 2-decade career in the DEA, was a special agent in charge, handled very complex cases on criminal enterprises, national security issues, financial crimes, corruption, drug trafficking, the whole gamut of things that we watch television shows about, and we're always fascinated by them and intrigued by, well, this guy's been inside of the real ones. And I'm guessing they're even more intriguing than the shows. He holds 3 master's degrees, one from us, one from LSE, London School of Economics, and one from John Jay, and a BA from Temple in Philadelphia. He's on numerous boards of a wide variety of organizations, including notably the Council on Foreign Relations. He does a lot of work in the intelligence community, does a lot of charitable work and nonprofit work. He's also a connoisseur of the arts, a member of the Metropolitan Museum of Art Advisory Committee on Cultural Engagement. So he's clearly a Renaissance man, a man for all seasons, and a very active, since he got here, a very active member of EMPA, and we're so happy to have him today. So John, it's all yours. Take over.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for that very kind introduction. I hope I live up to the billing, especially now that I know I'm the first of my class to present. I hope I blaze a good trail for everyone else to follow. Well, this afternoon, I'm going to talk about the impact of intellectual property theft on American innovation and prosperity. But the reality is, it's not just the impact on American innovation and prosperity, it's on global innovation and prosperity. Now, there are only 2 categories of companies affected by trade secrets: those trade secret theft, those that know they've been compromised, and those who don't know it yet. Those are the words of former Attorney General Eric Holder. Intellectual property theft poses a global risk to economic prosperity by using cyberspace to steal technology, intellectual property, disrupt government and commerce, and threatens critical infrastructure. Now, traditionally, national and international security has resided in physical domains: land, sea, space, and air. But the virtual world today has altered the landscape significantly. The open, transnational, and decentralized nature of the internet creates significant vulnerabilities to security through cyber attacks on both the public and private sector. So therefore, it's imperative that these threats be taken seriously and placed into what I would describe economic context. When we discuss intellectual property, we're referring to the creations of the mind, such as literary and artistic works, designs, symbols, names, images that are used in commerce. Now, there are 4 categories of intellectual property protection. You have trade secrets, which refer to specific private information that is important to a business because it gives a business a competitive advantage in the marketplace. And the same could be said for patents, copyrights, and trademarks. They too offer a competitive advantage. But here's the thing. The scale of international theft of American intellectual property is simply mind-blowing. Through cyber attacks and espionage, the United States loses hundreds of billions of dollars of intellectual property to theft by both nation state and non-state actors. According to the Heritage Foundation, cyber breaches exceeded the cost to the global economy by $2.1 trillion in 2019, more than quadrupling the cost since 2015. IBM's 2016 Cyber Security Intelligence Index says that healthcare, financial services, and manufacturing are the 3 top sectors targeted by hackers due to the vast quantity of information. Now, more broadly speaking, the 2 most devastating effects of IP theft are, firstly, the tremendous loss of revenue and reward for those who made the inventions or who have purchased licenses to provide goods and services. The second is that the theft of intellectual property undermines both the means and incentives for entrepreneurs to innovate. In other words, why would you go out there and put all that time and effort into bringing something to market, particularly if you're breaking into a new market or creating a new market, only to have it stolen? Equally important is that the knowledge stolen from IP theft accelerates a state's military and economic development, further reducing the global competitiveness. And let's talk about cheating at its best. A core component of acquiring science and technology. Let me be clear, I'm not referring to companies doing business in China subject to forced technology transfer in order to do business in the country. I'm referring to estimates of China's share of IP theft, which is approximately 70% to acquire both science and technology. As I mentioned, IP theft can save China decades of research and development, leading to a much faster change in the international business environment. Chinese hackers have targeted more than 24 universities in the United States, around the globe, as part of an elaborate scheme to steal research. We're talking about the University of Hawaii, University of Washington, MIT. They are among at least 27 universities in the US, Canada, and Southeast Asia that Beijing has targeted. Well, let me stop for a second and sort of step away and offer a broader context in this sense. You may ask the question, why China? Well, China and Russia are 2 of the most active countries involved in cyber espionage, but oftentimes their objective is completely different. Russia is known to engage in cyber espionage more along the line for misinformation, and we've seen that in the 2016 elections and subsequent elections behind that. China is focused, their cyber espionage, more for economic gain. So they've come at it completely different. And that's not to suggest that Russia does not engage for economic gain, or that China does not engage in misinformation. But China's focus is essentially how they can expand their business section. But here's the deal, it's not just a matter of nation state and non-nation state actors who have access or who go after intellectual property. The risk to companies also is a matter of insider attacks. And let me give you a couple examples. In 2015, a group of Chinese men incorporated a company on behalf of a Chinese manufacturer in Houston. The aim was to steal trade secrets from a company that created foam material with commercial and military applications. Luckily, the original manufacturers became aware of the operation and they notified law enforcement. 7 people were charged with IP theft and they're facing 10 years in prison. Another situation. From June 2017 until December 2018, a Chinese national was employed as an associate scientist at a petroleum company and was assigned to work in a group. November 2019, he pled guilty to the theft of trade secrets, unauthorized transmission of trade secrets, and unauthorized possession of a trade secret. In his plea agreement, he admitted to intentionally copying and downloading technology for research and development materials without authorization from his employer. Now, it's one thing for him to be facing the 24 months in federal prison, but the information that he stole from that petroleum company is valued at $1 billion. And that's just one situation. So then the question, at least I ask myself, and quite frankly, when I'm engaging in conversations with my clients is, how do you mitigate some of this risk? Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to create a culture where security is prominent and becomes almost second nature. For those of you who are old enough to remember, when you left your house, you normally had your keys and your wallet. And then as time went on, you had your keys, your wallet, and your cell phone. Today, at least for me, all of those things are in play, but I add a mask to it. The reason why I use those as an example is because it becomes second nature. And you have to create a culture by educating the workforce so that security becomes second nature. Employees must educate their workforces about the threat of intellectual property and trade secrets and how to protect themselves from such common attempts like phishing attacks. You also have to make sure that the managers have a culture of accountability, and you have to create a data use policy that clearly describes how data can be accessed, who and whom can access it. Last but not least, background investigations. Earlier in my career, I was in charge of background investigations for national security clearance, which is to say that any agent, whether it's for the DEA, FBI, or any of the federal law enforcement agencies, when you come on and you pass through that background investigation stage, you now have access to top secret information. And let me be clear, it's not just the agents, it's the support staff as well, because the support staff also has access to what the agents have access to. What's interesting about this is, and I think it distinguishes the federal government from the private sector, is you don't do one background. The ongoing onboarding process that you will find in the private sector is, for those who even conduct background investigations, it's one and you're done. Federal government doesn't do that. You are going to be subjected to either an annual or biannual full complete background investigation. And depending on if you're promoted or transferred to a new assignment, you have to be subjected to an additional background investigation. 2014, I was selected to go to Iraq and Afghanistan as part of a contingency of people in the government to see how they collected raw intelligence and synthesized it to actionable intelligence to be used on a battlefield. I could not participate in that assignment without going through a complete different background investigation, because I would now have access to information that I would not normally have had. It is something that people have to consistently think about, because at any given time, a person's risk profile can change. And that's where the federal government, I think, thinks about these things. And so what that looks like is, today I'm good, 3 months from now, I'm having serious financial problems. I might end up with bankruptcy. Now, I'm not going to say because you have those issues that it means you're vulnerable. But what it does mean is that if you're in an assignment where you can either have access to money or procurement, your employer or the government needs to know that. Because going back to the government, depending on what your financial issues are, they will strip you of your top secret clearance. It won't put you off the job, but they see your risk appetite or profile change, and they will make the appropriate adjustments. And so what I tell my clients is that you have to think this way. You have to really consider the people who are working for you, depending upon the assignment and their responsibility, to make it part of your culture to do these periodic background investigations. So ladies and gentlemen, that's my presentation, and I am open for questions.
Hey, John, it's Bill. So as I was listening to you, fascinating and scary, but also encouraging that we're focusing on these issues. But it also lines up, as many of the challenges that we face in the world today, is kind of opposite sides. So I'm with you on everything you said. And the alarm that goes off in my head is, what about privacy? And so, you know, as we look toward the future, is our view, our individual view of the opportunity to have personal privacy going to be very different from what it's been in the past? I.e., to make it more clear, do we have to give up privacy in this new world? Is personal privacy just no longer going to be the case?
It's a good question. And I think it's all about context and what you're trying to do. For the general public, no. But I think that if you're seeking employment in certain locations, yes. But think of it this way too. If you go back prior to 9/11, we lived in a completely different world than we do now.
Yeah.
Right? Getting on an aircraft was completely different than it was before, because the entire environment globally changed. Now, people's personal information is very important. And I think there is a concerted effort, as it should be, to make sure that that personal information is not compromised. But it's not necessarily just the personal information and just the privacy. It's that the way the world is operating right now is that there is so much information out there about you anyway. And I'll be brutally honest with you. I can get your Social Security information in seconds because you wrote it someplace, and these algorithms permit us to get this information when we put together what I would describe as an intelligence profile. Something that we recommend that our clients do, just to push out a little further, is that you need to know what the world, how the world sees you. So we do these intelligence profiles so that you can see everything that's out there, and we bring it together, and it gives you an opportunity to have a clearer look and maybe tighten up some places. Like I will tell people, LinkedIn is what you want the world to see. Your social media is who you really are. You will clearly see a disconnect between the image that you project on LinkedIn and then what you see on people's social media. And let me tell you why that's important. Because when we do background investigations and we provide a complete profile, When you do a background investigation, it's precisely, at least the way that we do them, is the same way that it's done in the federal government. You don't pass judgment. You do the background investigation, you provide the information for that company to review it and make an assessment depending on their risk appetite. Now, when we do it, we're looking at your social media profile as well, right? We put the links are there. And, you know, there was something that someone told me years ago that I think is applicable. It's personal and it's clearly up to the individual. Sex, politics, and religion. Those are the three things that people are most passionate about. And I'm not telling you that you shouldn't put that out on social media, but you give people an opportunity to see a perspective about you that they may not otherwise have. And some people will judge you on that. Mm-hmm. And so when we're talking about privacy, Bill, some of this privacy is a matter of information that people choose to put out there. Right. I don't know whether I answered your question, but
you did. Very much so. Can I just follow up with one more quick one, then I'll shut up? So the same, you know, pro and con side. So, you know, the field. So there is a lot of espionage that happens between the United States and China. On the other side, there's also a hell of a lot of legitimate trade that benefits both countries. If you were back in the government, how do you think about balancing those things, right? So the more you're investigating each other, it tends to undermine the trust you have on each other. So how does one, how would you be advising? I think a perfect example, if you were advising President Biden now as a transition where, you know, President Trump took, one would argue, a very aggressive, negative approach toward China. How would you counsel President Biden about how he should be handling the U.S. relationship with China?
I think that I would start by telling him to re-examine the approach that President Obama had with Jinping, and I'm mispronouncing his name. They had an agreement when it came to cyber warfare and espionage, because the rules are still being written in terms of what's the trip point that will lead to a kinetic conflict. They seem to have observed those during the Obama administration. Once the administration changed, China became very aggressive. I would advise him to go back and have that conversation and try to strike a balance in terms of rules of the road. We know that you're going to engage in espionage. We're all going to engage in espionage, but how far are we willing to go? And I think you have to have that conversation. There's a tremendous paper that was done called the Solarium Project that talked about these issues on a global perspective. And it brought some of the smartest people in the government, in both the private sector and the public sector together to sort of think through these, because to your point, you still have to do business with China. You just have to figure out how you both can do this without blowing each other up. But I will also tell you this. I just finished a master's degree at the London School of Economics because I want to be perpetually broke. Let me just start at that part, right? We did a trip in China. And what we did was we visited BMW, Airbus, a ton of companies. And I will tell you this, I wasn't that impressed for this reason. Much of their technology was a result of forced transfer. Where they are right now is almost directly related to people's desire to do business in their country. Airbus we visited, they were very clear that China used their technology to develop their own aviation industry. And what's interesting, their industry is so huge that they don't even need to go international to grow their industry. Boeing, to its credit, refused to transfer their technology, and they wouldn't do business in that country because of it. And so what you're seeing, I think, and I actually think this is a good thing with the Trump administration, is that a lot of companies are saying, you know what, enough of this, all right? Because we are tired of turning our technology over to you to do business, because no other country takes that same action against China. And so that's part of a larger conversation that I think you have to have, because there's a lot of animosity. And it goes back to my earlier point in terms of China's desire to increase their research ability and their science ability. And they're getting it through cyber espionage, and they're getting it through forced technology transfer. And it was just amazing to see how many companies operate in China, and in order to do business, turned over their intellectual property and they gained. And so what did that mean? That means that China didn't have the sunk cost. They didn't have to spend that money and wonder whether it was going to work or not, because someone else did all the research and development. That's all has to be part of the conversation. I don't think that you can talk to China about trade without talking about how they closed their society off to other countries unless they did business. And now they're opening up more, but more has to be done.
I'll let other people talk. I could have a conversation with you for weeks, so I'll let somebody else jump in.
So we have some questions. I know Sophia has her hand up, so I'll let her go first, and then we have some questions in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. Thanks, Bill. This is a great opportunity. Thanks, John. Thanks for a great presentation about your opinions. So I'm Sophia. I'm the EMPA candidate 2020. I'm going to graduate soon. And I also practice law in China since 2009. That's a long time. So during my career, I got the opportunity to work as an in-house for a multinational corporation. And also I'm helping the client with patent trade litigations between these two countries now. I fully understand what you are talking about. So there do some talking like once you do a business in China, especially you set up a joint venture in China, they have the forced technology transfer agreement, especially with the state-owned companies. And also we have these things in outside China is there are espionage for stolen this information. And also I also saw some cases recently, especially the FBI just arrested the people, especially Chinese scholars. This is the background. So my concern is the globalization, especially after China joined the WTO since 2001, China is rising. And I think based on my positive and optimistic attitude is the WTO will get back to work soon. I hope so. So if the WTO continue to work to promote the trade, the investment, among the world, then the world still have to do a lot of business among different countries. Another background is the China-US trade phase 1, the almost 100 pages agreement. There are a big section about how Chinese government promised to implement a strict intellectual property protection standard. And in the last year, the Chinese government modified the patent law. And also I always read the patent cases is the Chinese government implement a strict standard than ever before, not only to the foreign companies, also to our Chinese companies. I think that's a good sign. So my question to you is, what's the innovation and profit, the balance? So the globalization, that means people want profit, and also the innovation. But if, especially my experience with the multinational enterprise, we implemented the trade secret implementation system. So there are a lot of business people come to complain, I want this, I want more fast. This is some kind of, you put a strict intellectual property protection standard, the trade secret standard, and then that means you might slow down the process of innovation, or you might kind of make this profit. So for example, during the COVID-19 time, I assume there are some people already know something about the vaccine. Maybe there are some kind of balance between the profit and this kind of when they are going to publish the intellectual property rights, if I understand it correct. So especially in this kind of life and health sector, how we're going to balance the innovation and how we're going to protect the intellectual property rights. Another question is, so based on your understanding among the world, what there are better ways to educate the people among the world to raise their awareness about the precious value of the intellectual property law? And that's all. Thank you.
Let me make sure I understand part of your question. Are you saying that because China has instituted some of these IP protection laws, that it could slow down innovation?
No, that's not my question. I just means that China is doing better than before. They begin to implement the FISBA trade agreement. So my question is, based on the background that more and more multinational enterprise going to implement the strict intellectual property standard, is that going to slow down the innovation process, such as if we want the life science product to be more faster?
Well, it's funny because life science is one of the biggest targets for intellectual property theft, and you probably are aware of that. But I don't see why that would slow down innovation, right? I think what that does is what it should do is protect innovation, because if you think about it, it's a huge issue. Look, the laws are in place here in the United States to address that. And we have some of the most innovative companies in the world. You can go right out in Silicon Valley and see that, right? And so it didn't slow the process down there. I can't see how it would adversely affect innovation and change, because it's hitting more on a global stage and is really targeting a lot of China. So I just think what it does is clarify the rules of the road, so you know exactly what's expected, and people can feel a little bit more comfortable that they will have a competitive advantage, or they don't lose it because someone is stealing their intellectual property. If I understood your question correctly, I hope I answered it.
Okay, so that's your opinion, but I will reserve my opinion, because I got this kind of work with a multinational enterprise. I'm not only work for the Chinese government, Chinese company, also for the French company. So this kind of balance, it's just my personal experience. I appreciate your answer.
Yeah, but so any multinational is operating in different jurisdictions, in different environments, correct? And so is your question that with the IP being an issue in different environments, will that slow innovation? I don't know whether I clearly understand it, because let's take BMW, for example. BMW operates in China. They create cars specifically for the Chinese market. And China has helped develop technology with BMW, because they're sitting right at the table that doesn't go anywhere outside of China as well, because they claim part of that intellectual property. But I don't think, and I'm just may be misunderstanding your question, that anything will be stifled. I just think people have to find where that natural balance exists. And I think companies can do it. They just want to make sure that they're operating on a fair and level playing field. But we can have another conversation about this. I really would want to talk to you about this in a little bit more detail, because obviously you're in that space. I've done a lot of research in that space. So let's have an offline, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
But John, we have some questions in the chat. Do you want me to read them? Or
Yeah, if you could, that way I can sort of focus on answering them.
so from Alexis, how do you deal with EU and American laws, i.e. Pfizer and BioNTech collaborations as an example, but for smaller entities or nonprofits who may not have in-house attorneys, etc., to their disposal?
Yeah, I don't know whether I'm equipped to answer that question, but I can tell you that when we operate in another country, we partner with another company in that country that knows essentially what those rules are, because it's very difficult for us to move around without that. I will tell you a country that is extremely difficult besides China is India. India, how they operate is inexplicable to me sometimes, because when we try to get information, it's very difficult to do it, but we work with people in that country who know the laws, the rules of the road, and then it facilitates us just, and it's on the reverse. If they enter the United States, they rely on my firm to help them navigate the landscape.
Great. So we also have a question from Paul. Do you see a similar type of European GDPR or data privacy law implemented across the United States in the future?
Well, we certainly appear to be going in that direction, right? I think that's part of the conversation that's happening in Congress right now. There seems to be bipartisan support in terms of making, I will call it Silicon Valley or the tech industry, more responsible in terms of privacy. And maybe it's not fair to just put it on the tech industry, but the tech world itself. I think we're moving into that direction. I know when you get down to the granular level, there seems to be some disagreements between, how people will be held responsible. But GDP that's a very extreme. I don't know whether we'll land exactly there, but I think you're going to see privacy a main issue, and it will continue to be until something goes on the books. And it looks like legislatively, the country is moving in that direction.
Great.
I just jump in here because it's a space that I work in a lot, and I think this is a challenge for all of us, is the healthcare industry, where, through the pandemic, telehealth has exploded. India is a place that leads the world, but the US and other countries are now following. And then if you watch some of the new advertisements for the Apple Watch, it has all millennials like tracking their whole life, physical life, with their watch. And so I see a future potentially where all of us will wear some device which will communicate with our doctors and hospitals and whatever. Good thing, right? Prevent heart attacks, prevent strokes, prevent COVID advancing. But to do that, you are going to be communicating via cyberspace virtually everything, not just about your investments or your sex life, but your actual functions of your body. There's going to be a huge space for law, for government, for international, to figure out a way that we can manage this, right? I mean, because on the one hand, wouldn't we all want that? Don't we all never want to get really sick? And wouldn't we love to get like an email or a text from our doctor saying, no, you got to go on this pill like tomorrow before the stroke hits. But then that means they're going to be not just watching what I do, they're going to watch how I breathe every second of my life. Have you been involved in any cases that start to get into this space of health monitoring and how we do it?
No, that's clearly outside the scope of what we do, but I do think it speaks to this whole privacy issue that you mentioned earlier, that I don't know whether you will either have to opt in or opt out of that, or whether you will have a choice. but your personal information is out there in the Internet of Things, right? And this is where there's an opportunity for that information to be snatched and stolen. And when you create a new industry, there's a counter industry that emerges with it, both good and bad, right? Because people see the opportunity to take advantage of it. And then you have people who see the opportunity to protect you from it. But we have not been operating in that space.
Thank you.
So we have a pretty long question from Alexis, and I think it goes to the question she had earlier, but SEPA had 696 international students in fall 2019. Chinese students are being targeted and accused of theft or under scrutiny by USCIS and other agencies writ large. The tone by the US is leading to a slight decline, 0.09 in new enrollment, the third consecutive year of decline in US colleges and universities. Competitors like Canada and Australia are recruiting and attracting more, with China in 2014 surpassing the UK and the US as a top destination for international students from Africa. While IP theft and the 27 colleges you cited earlier may exist, how do you protect international students against racism, xenophobia? And then I think linked to that other question was, Columbia has an export control office for our basic research. Would you recommend yearly examinations for each individual student, faculty, or employee?
I'll be brutally honest, that is way beyond my pay grade, so to speak. I'm not equipped to answer that question. And it's news to me that Chinese students are being specifically targeted. What I have come to learn that there's closer scrutiny in terms of looking at some people who are in this country. Now, the impression that I got was that they weren't necessarily looking at you on your way into the country, is that they developed intelligence information about someone specific and then began to look at that individual. I think it's been well documented that there's a lot of people, or a fair amount of people from China and other countries, but China in particular, that is working in research institutions like Columbia that are actually part of the Communist Party. And then there's a discussion as to whether, like, well, you choose either the Republican or the Democrat. Like, are you actively engaged or are you just a member of the party? But the impression that I get is that there's typically something that causes them to look at a particular person. I also think that politics are in play here in terms of why the Chinese feel like they should go someplace else. This issue is also emerging in the UK. Tons of students are headed towards the UK, but quite frankly, the UK mirrors the United States in terms of the same challenges that they're having. The London School of Economics and Oxford University was accepting research money from entrepreneurs in China, and what they wanted was both of those schools to teach certain curriculum that they didn't want to do. And Oxford really pushed back because they were essentially threatened by the embassy in the UK, and they refused to take their money. So I tend to think, and as I said, I'm not deeply versed in this, but I think this is a complicated issue that politics sort of come into play as well.
We have another question. Our organization from Sergey, are organizations such as WTO and WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, playing any role in at least trying to curb IP theft, or are they completely sidelined by big guys such as the US and China?
I don't know what role they're actively playing and whether it makes a difference, because when it comes to, we're not talking about IP from a legal perspective that creates an existential threat to the United States and the global community. We're talking about the theft of intellectual property. So essentially, those rules don't apply, right? Because people are engaged in nefarious activity, and by the very definition, it means they don't care what those rules are.
Hey, John, can I ask you a question that really is a little bit off topic, but you spent a long time in the government. You had a long career, successful career. I know from our personal discussions, you enjoyed it and found it very rewarding. What was it like? You know, many of our EMPA students come in to advance within their current career, but a lot of them come thinking, well, you know, I've been in the private sector, in the government or whatever. I want to do something different. Now, you are working in a similar field, but it's entirely different to be essentially a civil servant in the federal government and then becoming an entrepreneur running your own business. What made you think you could do it? Why did you do it? What has surprised you about it? Better, worse, in between? Just talk a little bit about that kind of gigantic career shift from government employee to entrepreneur.
Good question, and I'm going to be brutally honest with you, Bill. When I looked at my colleagues, people who were similarly situated from my agency and Secret Service and FBI, I wasn't being offered the same jobs that they were. And what I saw happening, and I'm not the only person that, you know, I've had these conversations with tons of people, right? There's always that situation where there's a clique. And that clique went from the federal government into the private sector. There was an article several days ago in the Washington Post, correction, in the Wall Street Journal that sort of speaks to this, and it's dealing with Black law firms and the people who seem to get the big deals. And the people who only get the big deals are people who look like people in those positions, and they pull those people along. It's not an issue of qualifications, it's a question of opportunity. So when I stepped back, I looked at my professional credentials, I looked at my academic credentials, I refused to take those jobs. So I said, you know what? And it wasn't like I had thought about being an entrepreneur. The thought never crossed my mind. What I felt like my natural professional arc would have been, like many other people, work, nice pension, young enough to start and do something else, take a job in the private sector. When I saw what was offered to me, I was like, hell no. No. I'm not playing that game. And so I decided that I was going to do something on my own. And I won't lie to you, it was hard, because in my other job, if your computer didn't work, you had to pick up the phone and you could call somebody and Shazam, it was done. Now you had to figure that out for yourself. And I walked around in blindness, in the darkness for a very long time, because look, I could say I was an entrepreneur, and highly motivated as a federal employee, but this is a whole different world out here. And so I had to go out and build relationships. I had to develop relationships with former assistant United States attorneys who were now in private practice and needed investigators to do work for them. I had to partner with them. It's just amazing what you have to go through. I'm like 4 years in now, and I'm now at the point where I'm knocking on the door to some major corporations, right? Their opportunities are beginning to present themselves, and they presented themselves for several different reasons. It's like anything else. Once you open one door, then you can see beyond and other opportunities. But if you can't open that door, if you don't have that opportunity, then you don't see what's on the other side, right? And so it's been a challenge, but it's for me to walk into a room as a business owner, as a Black male, as a business owner, I can't begin to tell you how I feel about that. And the way I've approached this is somewhat counterintuitive, but I think a lot of business people think about this on some level. It's like, I don't really worry about making money. I worry about delivering a service to my people or to my clients, because initially, it's an honor for someone to do business with you the first time. Huge honor for them to do business with you a second time, because that means that you are delivering something that's valuable to them. And I was wondering when that expensive ass Columbia education will kick in, but let me tell you how it kicks in. Economics began to kick in, and this is something that I don't think people truly understand. It's the brand. when you go to Colombia, what you're paying for, in my view, partly is the name. So let me give you a story, a very quick story about this. I meet a guy who's Columbia alumni who introduces me to an organization that I never heard of, Business Executives for National Security. Go to the Business Executive National Security, I'm one of the few Black guys in the room. Opportunities presented themselves from being in that environment. That environment opened doors to other places because I attended a school that was very well known, and you don't necessarily have to go to Columbia, but what I do think is important that you have to network. And so I had two things in play. I had my professional network as a former agent, and it really was the former assistant US attorneys that sort of pulled me in, right? And let me just push the pause button here for a second. I had a hard time even figuring out where I was in the market in terms of my services, because one of my clients is a major law firm. And when I billed them, they called me on the phone and said, guess what? You're not charging enough money. You got to charge us, because what it will look like is that for our client, we're getting inferior service, right? Which they were not, and they understood that. That's my learning curve. So I brought my government network into play, and I put my Columbia network into play, because this is basically an operating principle that I've always had. You can say that I'm not the right person for the job, but you'll never say that I'm not qualified for the job. Because see, when you're not qualified, you're not part of the conversation. And when you're Black, you want to be, whether you're Black or not, but I'm thinking as a Black man, I don't want anyone to close the door because I don't meet it. Then you're not being talked about, right? And so when you have a Columbia pedigree, that doesn't mean it opens the door to everything, because it doesn't, because you still have to compete. But I just want to compete.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting you say that, because when I have these kinds of conversations with people about coming here, I tell them there's three reasons to come here. One, the obvious one, some of the highest quality education in the world. You're going to get the tools. Two, your network, the people who are in the room with you. And three, when your resume goes out or your business card goes out and it's Columbia University, it goes on the desk, not in the garbage can. So those are the three things you're buying. And it doesn't diminish any one of the three to say the three come together, right? So saying you're buying a certification is not a bad thing when the certification is accurate. It is one of the best educations in the world. The good thing is it's a brand, right? And we always talk about brands, and brands are valuable. We all use it, right? If you have a choice between a Mercedes and a Kia and everything else doesn't matter, you're going to buy a Mercedes. Why? Because I know Mercedes is like great, right? So it's great to have Columbia on your resume, because people see Columbia, they go, oh, wow, this person's smart. I call it the presumption of competence. Right. And that's what you want. If you come in and then you're an idiot, it's a one-off. You get one job, like you said, no one ever comes back. But you get in the job, you get in the door because of the presumption, then you do a good job. And now, hopefully, you have your client saying, you know what, John, you should charge more.
Right.
That had to be music to your ears. You probably felt a little bit stupid on one hand, but on the other hand, you had to feel pretty proud.
Right. It was a learning experience. It all is a learning experience. And if I could impart anything, is that unless you're retired, you're always working on your brand. If you're not working on your brand, you're not competitive. You always have, unless you're sitting home on the couch. But if you want to move forward, you have to consistently adjust to everything that's going on out here, because otherwise you die. You're not competitive. And so one thing that at least Columbia has done for me, it has helped me sustain that brand.
Well, that's why we have food for thought, right, Jeremy and Valerie?
Absolutely.
Another opportunity for us all to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you say, Jeremy? Are you going to call the question?
Yeah. Well, I just want to know if John wants to say anything before we go.
Closing remarks?
No closing remarks, but I'll be happy to take one more question. As long as it's not 2-page long, okay?
I don't think there are any in the chat.
Okay.
I had a few, but they were answered as we went along. So
Look, regardless, look, first of all, I just want to thank Valerie, Jeremy, Professor Emick for giving me this opportunity. I learned that I'm the first of the, I guess, the more later classes to participate in this. I really enjoyed the experience. I look forward to continuing to engage Columbia University. Everybody has my number. You got my email. If there's anything I can do to help the university, to help CEPA, I'll be more than happy to do it.